All righty. Well, welcome to the Raul Reyes Show. It's 7 o'clock on Tuesday. Let me make sure. Yep. And if you're in Texas, we are literally freezing our butts off. And if you know anything about Texas, especially down here when you get a little closer to San Antonio, we don't know how to drive in freezing rain. That's all there is to it. So, schools were closed today. They're closed tomorrow for a lot of places. So, if you're out on the road and you're stuck on Interstate 10 between Kerrville and Junction, because they've had, in all seriousness, they had some serious wrecks out there. Avoid that area. Heck, avoid all highways right now. Just kick back, grab your coffee and your tea, maybe your wine, and listen to Lieutenant Colonel, retired from the Air Force after 22 years, now doing a podcast trying to bring to you just some politics and banter. And we're having a conversation about just about everything. As the world seems to be in a complete mess, Ukraine is a mess, Joe Biden is a mess. Looks like we're going to be in a large food fight with the raising the debt limit, and we'll see how Republicans hold up with Kevin McCarthy on that. The border, the border is still a wreck. And today or tonight, I've got Sheena Rodriguez, wonderful friend, doing a lot of work on trying to bring attention to the border in Austin. She's been in Washington, D.C. And we're going to talk a little bit about the NGOs that she's looking to expose. We are doing that here as well. If you've listened into a whole lot of different of our friends, Frank Lopez and Manny Rodriguez on the Talk About It Live. Sheena's got her own podcast. We're doing that here. All of it in an effort to bring you the latest and greatest about what's happening, not just on the border, but across the spectrum. So, real quick, before I forget, as Julio always tells me, he's my trusty sidekick, to tell you all, please share the podcast at all these mediums. Website coming soon. We are going to go back to Spanish. We just trying to line up a few things so we don't look like rookies when we do. And but all of that is coming to a theater near you, which is your computer or your iPhone. So check us out every Tuesday at 7 o'clock. I've got another great announcement to make tonight. Friday, we're going to have a special broadcast at 7 o'clock. If you know who this guy is, the photo's a little blurry, but Pedro Gonzalez is going to be on the show at 7 o'clock. He goes by at Amaritas in on Twitter, and he's a phenomenal political sensei pundit. Is really speaking out on a lot of things that are happening. We're gonna have a great conversation about what's going on with Trump, and Pedro here is going to give us some highlights. And of course, 7 o'clock on Friday, we'll throw that up on all the social mediums. He's going to advertise on his piece, and then we're going to have a great conversation with Pedro here. But for now, as we always do, uh, again, the weather in Texas is bad. Kick back and relax. Let me bring on my good friend, Sheena Rodriguez, real quick here. Howdy, ma'am. How are you today?
We're freezing. Frozen in
Everybody,
the tundra.
yeah,
Yeah.
everybody's tucked away. I won't tell you what's in this drink, and just everybody's trying to stay warm. Listen, and for everybody who is brand new or watching, Alliance for a Safe Texas. This is a pack that you created. Give me the 2-minute version. What drove you to do this, and how are things coming along that line?
Yeah, so thank you so much. It's a pleasure, of course, to be on again on your show. So excited. Yeah, so we started Alliance for a Safe Texas because as we went around the border, everywhere from the RGV up through El Paso and even out there to Yuma,
Yeah,
it's not enough to just know what the situation is and the travesty that's occurring at our sovereign state border. That impacts far more. I mean, while of course our friends and neighbors and fellow Texans along the southern border feel the brunt of it, right? They're quite literally being invaded. It doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop along, South Texas. It infiltrates throughout every single one of our 254 counties, and beyond into the nation. And so it's what then are the negative impacts that people may not associate with the border crisis that we all feel in some way, shape, or form, and then most importantly, what can be done about it. So that's what I've set out to do. Traveled all over the great state of Texas, which is a country in its own. When especially when you're out there on the road, right?
Well,
Um,
I'm glad you're not on the road today because
Not
it's
today.
horrible.
No.
Sheena, let me ask you this, and because I remember first meeting you, and you were originally driven by a different subject altogether, right? But you leaped over to the border, and I know we met because, of course, we're down in Del Rio, Eagle Pass, all over the place. At some point, we were all sort of interconnected with Latinos for America First and Trump and a bunch of other, we're all just trying to make sure that if you're going to come to this country, it's going to be legally and it's going to be done correctly. But none of that is happening. You originally started on the abortion side, is that right? Pro-life. You were trying to, and then what? But you crossed over because that seems to be it's the children. Is that what this is?
Yeah, so actually, and I just got back from our nation's capital for the March for Life, and it was really a full circle movement for me personally because, yeah, that's where I started my advocacy. I was never really into the politics side of things. I always voted Republican, thought that I was informed by watching Hannity and Combs back when that was on,
Oh
and Bill
boy.
O'Reilly. You remember, I thought that I was doing my duty, being informed. But I actually was a pro-life counselor at a center up here in North Texas for quite a number of years. And I did that part of it, but was really never into the politics side. So when I felt that push and started getting active in the politics realm, I would say about 2.5 years ago or so at this point, and started fighting for all things conservative, specifically in our state capital in Austin. But then when I felt that push, that call to go down there to the border, I felt God reveal to me, and I don't want to sound like a crazy person, but I felt Him reveal to me like this is now where I'm leading you in your pro life advocacy, because especially with what is happening with the children that are being trafficked and throughout our state, throughout our country, using our taxpayer dollars. And of course, we have our calls to action with that. But yeah, that was the main motivator. That's why I'm so passionate about it, is the exploitation of human beings, specifically children, using our taxpayer dollars occurring right here in our state. And our federal government looking us in the face and laughing and essentially lying to us that this isn't happening and occurring. So
Well,
yeah,
so let me jump into that nitty gritty here. And folks, this is Sheena and I and more so Sheena because she's been just about everywhere as well in the on the border. And let me ask you this. I saw an article that you wrote, NGOs opening doors to unaccompanied minors. This is sort of the NGO aspect of what's going on out there. And, right down the road here, we're in Medina County, you're way up north, but there in San Antonio, we woke up one day and all of a sudden, down in one of the busiest areas, NGOs rented out this large space. And next thing you know, white buses, everybody's there. But this has happening in Del Rio, all the way down into Laredo and Brownsville. In fact, we had Mike Howell here, and we put up a map, complete map of all the NGOs that were across mostly Texas, but all the way into Arizona and California as well. And of course, they've got these posts, and this is what I want to ask you. Seems like in the beginning there was a lot of NGO facilities like the Border Mission Hope in Eagle Pass, the Valverde Humanitarian Center right there in Del Rio, and on and on. But you're writing an article, and I see you on a video. You're actually challenging with questions. It was the NGO is Endeavors, right? And was that Ullman, the CEO, the president, or this was somebody else? Who? Give me the story on where were you? Because people think this is a border issue, but these NGOs are now coming to a theater or a city near you, right?
yeah, absolutely. So I was down there in Eagle Lake, which is just outside of Houston, kind of sandwiched between Houston and San Antonio.
Right.
and hundreds of miles away from the border, right? And this was specifically endeavors. You mentioned, BCFS, which is the Baptist Family Services. The Lutheran churches, of course, are well known as well. Catholic Charities, the smaller ones like Mission Border Hope and Valverde, and some of the other ones that you mentioned. Endeavors actually came to the forefront about shortly after the Biden administration came into office with a lot substantial amount of no bid contracts. But prior to that, they've never really been on the scene, right? Compared to like a Catholic Charities, if you will. But they purposely injected themselves. Now they're over the large Pecos facility. Some of your viewers may be familiar with that. We had Fort Bliss and the Pecos facility out there, which is the Pecos is ran by Endeavors.
Right.
That were the large influx facilities for unaccompanied minors. And the unfortunate reality is that there's a substantial more money available off the backs of quote unquote aiding these unaccompanied minors than there is in aiding, let's say, homelessness, homeless veterans, right, that served our country.
Right.
And so they're coming to the forefront, and they're attempting to open up a smaller facility in Eagle Lake. And prior to this, I'm not sure that this has ever been done before, but really to the credit of the new mayor of Eagle Lake, asked Endeavors if they would be willing to hold a town hall open to the public. And the mayor there so graciously gave me a very substantial amount of time to be able to ask some of the questions, because when else are you going to get an opportunity like this
Right.
to come face to face? And it was the COO, so the Chief Operating Officer's Chip, I always say is that Fulgham, something like that.
Yeah, Foreman,
Um,
Foreman or something like
yes,
that. Yeah.
yeah, of Endeavors. And look, I mean, we're all human, right? He stood there, and he took it, in the sense of there was a lot of upset, and rightfully so, residents there. And so I asked some very hard hitting questions. Of course, everything that comes out of my mouth, this, Raul, I have checked and verified 100 times over. I know what I'm talking about. And so he answered maybe two of my questions with really a non-answer, but thankfully I will have an opportunity soon. I was asked if I would like to have a one-on-one meeting, so a private meeting, and I will be doing that where I can ask some of the rest of my questions and hopefully bring some of those answers to the rest of Texans. But this is going to be an issue. And I went into great detail. This is not just Endeavors. This is not just Eagle Lake. This is going to be coming to a city near you, if not your own specific city. And so at Alliance for a Safe Texas, we're trying to, number one, get to the bottom of it. How did this happen? But then number two, what can we do proactively to try to stop it? And that's what we are setting out to do.
So let me ask you this, Sheena, because again, we look at the border, and initially, between January and May of 2021, when Biden took over, and I know you were active with myself and a guy named Frank Lopez, who's terrific, down in Del Rio, and we were doing all these rallies. And the point was that we wanted to bring attention to what looked like all these facilities that were popping up, and the travesty of it all was that we were hearing these children were being molested, some were raped, and nobody was really talking about it up until it happened at the Bexar County or San Antonio facility. And you see Abbott rushing down there, sort of to throw a wet blanket of it, and they closed that facility up. Now we're looking at Eagle Lake. When I look at the map at Eagle Lake, it literally sits in this geographical channel, because if folks, if you're looking at that little hump over Texas, Del Rio sits at the very top. But if you go sliding down like you're going down to Brownsville, but you're going to have Eagle Pass, and then in that area is this geographical scenario that runs everybody through what looks like Kinney County, which is Kerrville. But then I look at Eagle Lake, and it seems to be a straight shot out to Houston, as if they're posting and posturing the route all the way out. Here's my question for you. They seem to now be going to places in Texas where seemingly they're going to create colonias, right? These colonies of new illegal aliens, and somehow they're here legally now. I know you haven't gotten out to Oklahoma and all these, but are you hearing anything like that? Are some of these facilities, is Endeavor's projected to go to other cities, especially other red states? Because when I had Mike Howell here, what we were realizing is that they're now just getting beyond the border and into Texas, like Eagle Lake, because, oh, by the way, that's Houston, Texas. You see, a big metropolitan area where they need employment, or you fly out of there to another big. Are you hearing anything else as endeavors? Do they endeavor to go to another state to do this? Are you seeing any of that at all?
So I can tell you, and you hit on some really good points in your line of questioning there, leading up to that, that maybe we could try and touch on, because this has major implications just in the geographic location. I just want to point out, if you look at those highways that you just spoke of, and if you're familiar with the area, those are major trafficking highways. Houston is number one city for trafficking in the United States. Okay. So again, that leads to some of the other concerns, right, that we alluded to. But in regards to, are they opening up? I can't say whether or not Endeavor specifically is opening up. I will say other similar types of facilities. I will say that earlier this month, actually, ORR, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, put out I don't want to say newsletter, a press release, if you will, mentioning that, mentioning the Pecos facility, mentioning Fort Bliss facility and their intentions of expanding those, but also, of course, and I spoke about this a while back. God, it feels like forever ago. The time just all mushes together. Another facility out there in North Carolina. Now, this is a massive facility out there that's actually, if you look at the donor list, leads back to China, if you could believe that or not. It feels like a while back since I spoke about that. But where this has wider implications across Texas is that during the November 2022 Eagle Lake City Council meeting, Chip, the COO, had actually mentioned that they needed to find a way to be able to go around the governor's proclamation that happened in May of 2021. And again, I write about this extensively in the two recent articles in the Substack. Where they he essentially ordered Texas HHS Commission to revoke or withhold or not renew the state licensings for these types of facilities. So they essentially created a way, they being Texas HHS Commission, created an exemption that satisfied the needs of the federal government so that they could release the fundings for these smaller types of facilities. Well, if they did it for Endeavors for this one facility, you could understand and see how that could have wider implications across Texas.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, during that November meeting, Chip had stated that there was 52 other similar types of facilities that were going to require the same type of exemption so that they could receive their funding throughout the state of Texas. Now, that was coming out of his mouth. I have not been able to verify that number, but I can promise you that we are working. Alliance for a Safe Texas is working in conjunction with some other organizations and putting in request of information to find out who has filed for these state agents for the state agency exemption
Right.
and where they are intending to open these locations so that we can try and take this. When we talk about taking action right there in your city and county level, this is what I preach about, and that's what we're hoping to be able to do, is to try and fight it so that this way, if we catch it before they open their doors on the city level, we can try and stop it. But yes, it has wider implications across Texas, and more than likely across the United States. Absolutely.
Well, and so here's some a little bit more information for our viewers here that most people, and you might know this too, but um, Endeavors for a lot of folks seems to be the one growing a lot of its footprints, and now it's out at Eagle Lake. They just happen to be right down here, headquarters in San Antonio on Deszavala Street. As an aside, and a kick to our El Menso is what I call our congressman. You see, so Tony Gonzalez had his office there for about 3 years until we sort of pimped him out and realized and it's not good to get reelected in 24. So he's going to start to look like he's the conservative congressman. But the reason I mentioned Congressman Tony Gonzalez isn't just because we bash him here deservingly, but his good friend who endorsed him early on in the primaries. And by the way, for people, we're sort of connecting dots here so you understand that a lot of us during the primary, and I say voters, uh, we get hoodwinked by all these endorsements, and there's always this thing in the back. His friend Michael McCall, Representative Michael McCall, let's kick him around a little bit. What most people don't know is that endeavors up until 2020, November 2020, somewhere in there, maybe October, right before Biden had just won the election, and 21 he takes over. But if you go look in the files, maybe 4 months before January of 2021, what you see is Michael McCall has sent a letter to Congress, and he's asking for a. It's sort of what happens in contracts, folks. There's what they call the FAR, FARR, and it's a Federal Acquisitions Regulations. It tells people, in administrative places, how to allow contracts to go from one company, from the government to another, to the private company. In this case, endeavors at that time did not have the certificate to house migrant children. And would it surprise you that the person who helped get that was Representative Michael McCall, who in the earlier primary between myself, we had a runoff with Tony Gonzalez. And see, it's hard not to make it a part of me. It's hard not to make it, about Sheena. It's hard not to make it about Raul. But this all ties in about why they don't want Sheena anywhere near Austin or Washington, D.C., or Raul to be one of your elected officials, you see. So back to Representative Michael McCall, who now happens to be the chair for one of the it's the one that does all the foreign, you know, acquisitions, big money committee. And so Michael McCall pushed a letter out that helped push the certification for endeavors to allow migrant children in their facilities. So as soon as that happens, all of a sudden Endeavors is grown just tremendously. And you see them out at Fort Bliss. And then guess who goes out there? The congressman from Congressional District 23 is out there congratulating them. You see the facility open up in San Antonio. Of course, they sort of had a faux pas and something happened. And now you see Eagle Lake, and Sheena's on top of all of these. But Michael McCall now is in deep with Ukraine because he just here a week ago or so is talking about more tanks and give Ukraine all these monies, which by the way ties all back to what you're saying with just China. And if you hang on till not next Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that, we're going to have a whole series on Russia and Ukraine and how it all ties back to Joe Biden and why we have issues on this border. All this is open source. I'm not giving you anything I've had from before, but back to the border, it seems, Sheena, on the federal side, this is a Democrat president induced issue. But we seem to have Republican representatives who are okay with this happening because there's a lot of money being made. Um, have you ever tracked who Endeavors gives money to? I mean, that would be neat to have a conversation about where they donate their biggest fund. I got to believe Michael McCall, Tony Gonzalez, all these people. I'm 100% sure Chip Roy may not be on the list because he's out there fighting the good fight, from what I can tell. Have you ever tracked the money from Endeavors? Do they donate to representatives? Have you gotten that deep? Or I know you're on the border and policy advocate, but tell me what you know about where the money goes, if you know something.
Yeah, so I'm very happy to hear some of those names being brought up because I'm trying to reach a broader audience who may not be familiar with Representative or with Congressman McCall. But Cynthia Penny, shout out to Cynthia Penny. She's a friend of mine. She's helped lead the efforts right there in Columbus and Eagle Lake, and she had sent this out. She tuned me into this. Actually, it was a letter of recommendation that Congressman McCall actually had written for endeavors. Okay,
Yep.
is basically what you're talking about there, and that letter of recommendation. Shortly when it came to reelection time, On paper, he wrote that letter of recommendation, but during re-election time, he stated to his constituents that, oh, well, but that's not what I meant. I did not mean that. They did great work. They, being Endeavors, did great work for for veterans, and that's what I was citing, basically alluding to the idea that he was somehow conned into writing this letter. I can tell you that while I helped to facilitate some of the meetings with some of the concerned constituents of the Colorado and nearby neighboring counties. It was very easy for me to be able to facilitate some of those meetings with some of our state legislators. I reached
Yeah.
out to McCall's office, which is outside of the Capitol, not too far from in Austin, and I was told that we would have to wait, that there was no dates available for a meeting with a staffer because, of course, he's supposed to be in DC. We know that Tony Gonzalez and John Cornyn, and again, remove you and I and our personal interest, if you will, with this or beef with it. The truth of the matter is that Tony Gonzalez and John Cornyn have both advocated for these types of facilities and for the expansion of these types of facilities and the use. I mean, heck, they just, they in the omnibus bill, right? Like, you can spend money, on the border, but not for border security, but for expanding these types of facilities. Well, now we're looking at it and it's happening. And unfortunately, it looks like McCall has been given the opportunity to officially reverse track, not just verbally to his constituents, but let's see it black and white on paper, he revokes this recommendation. We have yet to be able to see that. Hopefully we'll be able to get that meeting. But, again, we began looking into some of the finances,
Yeah.
specifically for Congressman McCall. And I will tell you that there were some large donations that unfortunately were made through, how could I almost like a generalized fund that donors can put money into and say that they want it to go to specific individuals without tracking.
It sounds like they're, and I'm not going to say the money laundering piece. What I'm going to say, it sounds like they're kind of generalizing the donation, but I think everybody understands if you put it there, it's going to be towards supporting this issue here. Um, I think it amazes me that, look, eh, what really kills me, folks, is I remember having a complete fit about even voting for John Cornyn. And of course, in the Republican circles, they look in conservatives and they accuse you for being pro-Democrat if you dare not vote for. And sometimes they'll say, "Look, he's an SOB, but he's our SOB." I'm like, "Well, your SOB is about to vote for amnesty." And he, along with Tony Gonzalez, Senator Sinema, I think in Arizona, and Henry Cuellar, who's running up for re-election. This is about a year or so before the campaign kicked off, and now we're post that. But these four individuals put out a bill that said we need more NGO facilities. And so the next thing is amnesty, I think, because that's what they're ringing the bell for. Are you slow down? Because as I've seen from before middle of 2020, and then when Joe Biden takes over because he won the election till now, it's just, full speed ahead with the white buses and everybody else now. And they made it very clinical. If you go to Del Rio, it's normal operating life procedures there. People cross over at 2 in the morning, they're processed, and buses are out the door by 5 o'clock. So even if you work at Laughlin or somewhere at 6 in the morning, the buses have already cleared the door. I guess what I'm wondering here is what's next? Is it let up at all, Sheena? And if not, because I almost see this, we've got enough people in red states, and now let's go give them amnesty. Because if you, for people who don't know, Joe Biden just today or yesterday announced that sometime in May they're going to do away with COVID restrictions. And why is that important? Because it's all part of control and how the money gets spent. So when you do away with that, uh, some of the monies that goes for these things are no longer in that disaster piece. Remember, they declared a disaster without declaring a disaster on the border to use money they typically would use for hurricane relief and all these other things. And now, for a lot of you are wondering, how do you know that, Ro? Well, I did acquisitions, I did contracts, large contracts for the government. And from what we can tell, a lot of what's happened on the border, the way they get away with the money going to people is a disaster declaredness. So if you were to have a hurricane out in Houston, guess what? The government with FEMA rolls in and starts to dish out money. That's sort of what they're using here, and it's sort of a back loop to get it done. All that said, back to Cena. Tell me, is it letting up? And be, and if not, is the next step amnesty? Because that's what I keep hearing from everybody. The Libre Initiative, which is deeply in bed with Tony Gonzalez and all these other people. 2024 should be a bloodbath for these rhinos. It really should. But I said that in 2022, and all the McDaniels and McConnells and McCarthy's let us down. So what say you? Is it letting up? I mean, what's going on here?
Unfortunately, I do not think so. Oscar, Blue, Anthony, and myself a while back before Fox News was even talking about it was trying to bring attention to the use of the launch of the CBP1 app. The revamping of it because it's
Yeah.
not anything new. I think I wrote about that as well. It's not anything new, but it's a revamping of it. It's literally changing the definition of quote unquote legal immigration, which is still illegal. It's fitting their own narrative. And I think that what you're going to see with these types of facilities, in addition to, and if we go off of what they are telling us, like that statement by ORR earlier this month, they're calling for more of these types of facilities for unaccompanied minors, not less. They're ramping up, and I think that that's where, like, again, we're going to start seeing more of these facilities. They want it to be quick. They want it to be quiet. They do not want it in the public's eye. So they are changing, and they're going to be shifting away from these larger types of facilities to these smaller facilities. But in order to be able to compensate for that, they're going to have to build, if I can, a crap ton of them. Okay.
Yeah.
And open a lot more to be able to compensate it. Why? Because the big type of facilities like Pecos looks really bad. The big types of groups, that I've even personally recorded coming over the border, including over there in Yuma, Arizona, where you've got hundreds and if not thousands of people at one time crossing, it looks bad. And it had gotten so bad that even mainstream media was forced to mention it. Of course, they threw their spin on it, right?
Yeah.
But they're trying to avoid that. So they're like, how else can we, when Mayorkas talks about safe and orderly transition, they want to change the definition of what their interpretation of what quote unquote illegal and legal immigration looks like by the use of the launch of the revamping of this app. And then they want to make it where it's even further hidden and further removed from the public's eyes. And then they don't want these large types of facilities. They want to start shuffling to these smaller types of facilities so that it doesn't raise alarms, so that it doesn't, it doesn't look bad. It doesn't allow for those, photo ops of, Fox News throwing their drone up in the air. It looks bad, right? And it's all about the optics. So it's not dwindling down. Quite the contrary, it's going to ramp up in a substantial way. And I believe that by them lifting the, President Biden lifting the Title IV, the COVID mandate, is also a precursor for the eventual lifting of Title 42, because you can't lift Title 42 while you still have COVID mandates in place, right? So I think that's the other part of it. But I think it's going to, and every single time that a Republican, like John Cornyn, like Tony Gonzalez, even mentions the word amnesty, even mentions it, or DACA or Dreamers or anything like that, here comes another rush. Here comes another rush. So, there's going to be a huge flood still coming over, if not even more so, just more hidden and more removed from the public's eyes. And
Well,
that is even more ominous.
no, and that's what we call an alley-oop, folks. I tossed that out with the COVID piece because Sheena knows that's exactly what's going to happen. It's a precursor to going away from Title 42, because as soon as he cuts that, uh, guess what? I think the rush is on. And if Title 42 goes away, now a lot of our patrol friends, and if you're not watching Talk About It live on Tuesdays at 8 o'clock in the morning, you really need to listen to Manny Rodriguez and, of course, the border patriot Frank Lopez as well. um, because what they're seeing is Title 42 goes away. I mean, it's now every Mexican on the other side who declares asylum can pretty much come across, and there are plenty of people ready to come to America. We're not going to be able to, stop this tidal wave. And I remind folks, we've got Chinese that are coming through. I think they caught something like 17 terrorists that are coming through. So now let me take you to a, uh, you know, sort of this other path real quick because we've been talking federal. So let's get down to some state level action. I know that you're out there in Austin. I see you all the time. I've been there a couple of times with you, and you've been knocking on representatives. The very representatives, uh, the state of Texas, by the way, has been Republican for 19 years. Congress in the last 40 years has been Republican for almost two-thirds of that. So we're up to our eyeballs in debt at the federal level. But down here, and I'm going to sort of go general here real quick. We have CRT in schools, the mama bears that come out to push back on that. Taxes are incredibly high, and now we have a surplus, and it went from 37 billion to give it back to 25 billion. Looks like it's going to end up 15, maybe even 5 billion, which is really just a sort of a slap in the face to all the taxpayers because nobody really wants to solve that problem. And then you go on to just gender mutilation. We seem to not be able to touch that. I did say general, folks. Now what? But on the border, we seem to not have the cojones for anybody to do. And I know I'm going to do it because I do it all the time. Abbott doesn't seem to, even though he's declared that we're under an invasion, he did nothing constitutionally because he really, we can blame the fault here is the federal government under Biden and Congress who has allowed someone like Mayorkas. Mayorkas is an administrative creeper. I call him creep because he's a he's a nobody relevant to the laws. If he doesn't follow the laws, we should have arrested this guy. But he's actually policying his way around the laws, which is why everybody and their grandmother is coming into this country. So so ultimately, it's in state governor leadership hands, i.e., Greg Abbott. But I don't see Greg doing anything other than playing this footsie with the wording, and here we are. Now, and I'm going to do this because I do it all the time. Here on this show, we call out everybody. Where the hell is Dan Patrick? Why isn't he beating up on Greg Abbott? Look, we are being invaded. Houston already was looking different. But all the colonias I see out there is going to completely convert Houston into some different looking city we've never seen before. And with the taxes going up, a lot of people who were able to live in like Austin can't live there. They got to go to Buda or some of these outskirt cities because the taxes are too high, even after you pay the house off. So what that's been a disappointment to me, Greg Abbott. And of course we've got some other pundits. I'm gonna leave the names off for now. Sort of, oh, Abbott sucks. Abbott sucks, right? And that's what they say, but they don't kick around anybody else. And then, of course, I don't see them advocating for groups like yours and other grassroots that are literally trying to move the ball forward. The question is this: what has happened to Abbott, in your opinion? Is it I'm going to run for president, and I can't afford to really get in deep because this is all going to hurt him. There's no way he runs for president. Um, unless somebody's given him a gig of vice president already, then I understand sort of why he's kicking along. But isn't Texas let us down? And then we'll get into because I want you to touch on this is we just voted for Dade Phelan, who isn't going to pass any other priorities because he's given Democrats key chair positions, and that's how this game goes. What are your thoughts on that? Are we doomed in Texas too for whatever reason?
I think it really just depends on who shows up. I think it depends on how much pressure is applied. Governor Abbott has always been reactive, not proactive. And you mentioned even back when we started the rallies and the meetings, right? When we raised enough noise, all of a sudden it had to be addressed. right? Actions had to be taken, and that's where like this proclamation started, and some of the
And
other
we'll pat
actions.
ourselves in the back, Sheena, because all the
We'll
work
take
we
it.
did,
We'll
all
take
the
it.
work we did, guess who went to Del Rio
We were there
around
together.
May, June timeframe, right?
Yeah.
And man, I can remember the whole civic center in Del Rio where I grew up. Just as soon as he says, and we're gonna build that wall, and man, the world went, and we're gonna arrest everybody. And I'm like, okay, and I'm looking at Frank Lopez, the border patriot. I'm like, he's like, okay, this isn't something's wrong here.
Well,
And then he goes,
the private landowner meeting was much different when the cameras were turned off, if you remember. So
no, and for the record, I was the last person. I meant to say this in the last piece there, but I was the last person who asked a question, and I got in there because somebody said, "Hey," of course they look at Raul, and I'm all hairs all over the place, and I think I'm wearing a cowboy hat. I don't look, I don't look like a retired lieutenant colonel when I put on a cowboy hat. Let me just rate that right there. So he says, "Hey, are you a landowner?" I said, "Yeah, I grew up here." Okay, well, come on in. Anyway, so I asked my question. The question went to what you've been hot on the trail was because I was really upset about the NGOs. And if you recall, a month earlier, he had written an executive order that said no state facility will house migrant children. But then at the next line, he says, unless you're federally contracted. And so he gave everybody a buy. And this is how we have all these NGOs because they're federally contracted. So it goes Border Patrol, they get a bus ride to the DHS facility or Customs and Border, wherever that's at. They get fingerprinted and they never leave federal control because then they go to a federally contracted NGO facility of sorts. And so there we have it. All I can say is and ask again, the pressure, it's to me it almost seems like for naught because they're lobbying all these bills from the Senate. And listen, Dan Patrick knows this. He knows he's being saved by feeling on the other end. So I think we can apply a lot of pressure, but I mean, is this something we can rectify in 2024? Certainly, Matt Rinaldi has woken up to the reality. And by the way, this is a reality. When I ran in 2020, and I remember again, I'm tossing his name around. Frank, I hope you're listening. And we had these conversations, the border patriot and I, and we would say there's something wrong here. You see, we're good conservatives, new to the whole process, trying to change, trying to put our input. Democrats hate us, but Republicans don't want us. You see, and so I guess for you, when can we apply pressure? Is that a reality? I mean, what's it going to take? Half the city to come in because Eagle Lake. I saw the video that you did, and then I guess the article that they put in the paper because you sort of put the pictures of the article that the newspaper wrote up. There's actually some people who are okay with this facility being there because it provides jobs. And so
so they claim.
Is Eagle Lake sort of one of these we need any job we can get? I mean, is that why they drew to this thing? Because it's
There
not good for
was
the city.
Right. There was two separate articles. One is extraordinarily left leaning. The other one is a little bit more fair, and you could immediately see which newspaper, local newspaper, is which when you read the write ups. There was all of one person that was there in support out of that room.
Yeah.
Everyone else was standing in opposition and stressing some of their concerns, mainly safety, along with other concerns. But and we went into detail. Later on with some of the concerns about the claims of the jobs that it's going to provide. What kind of an implication is this going to have when we already have a law enforcement that's strapped? We already have healthcare facilities that are strapped. We already have ISDs. Like, for example, one person stood up. She was part of the Republican Party there in that area, and she stood up and said, we have 15 teachers gone out of just that one elementary school. Endeavors can pay substantially more than our local Rice ISD, How many more good qualified teachers is this going to pull from our local ISD? And then
Yeah.
who is that benefiting, right? So how many people are qualified even from those local communities to actually work for these types of jobs? So there's a lot of question marks there. But
Well,
with
they
regards
actually
to the
have to
state.
if you go to Pecos and I've got family in West Texas. Oh, and if you go to Pecos, they've actually brought in a whole new workforce because of exactly what you're saying. They don't have qualified nurses and psychologists and all this other stuff. Now, sure, maintainers and all this other stuff, but uh, they closed the Midland facility because August Pfluger up there and the mayor threw a fit.
Mhm,
And so they got all those children, and so they had to make the facility in Pecos a lot bigger. And when we did this back in when we did the rally in Carrizo Springs, one of the biggest problems that they had down there was all the teachers were going over to the facility because they were making 2 or 3 times more than the state was paying them.
mhm.
And they said, "Look, we're gonna be here 5 years." Like, they already knew this. And so, but and then hotel costs were, like, something, like, extraordinary, like, 3 or $400 a night. And, of course, they were housing all the workers there, which, again, they would import. Eagle Lake, I think, is when I read the article in the paper, what really drew to me was the fact that they're putting and I don't know about Eagle Lake, but if the facilities I've seen, Sheena, are being put in economically depressed areas,
Mhm.
so it sort of goes along with the well, if they're going to produce jobs, we can go ahead and it's sort of like getting in bed with the devil here because you want the jobs, but you're working for people who are invading the country. Um,
Well,
Eagle Lake is that
and more than that, again, if you're pulling a handful of qualified teachers that are working, let's say in this case scenario, Rice ISD, because now Endeavors is offering to pay 60 to 70,000. Where does that leave our children
yeah,
that are in that public school? And the same thing in the healthcare resource center. And then they transport workers, like you said, from outside of the area. And then they put them up in hotels or in local places, rental properties there, whatever, so that this way they could say, oh no, look, we're hiring straight because they live here, so we're hiring Colorado County residents, when in fact those were Colorado County residents that have moved there. They aren't the ones that have lived there, prior to the opening of the facility. But and then just with regards to the state legislator and where are we going to, from the governor to Lieutenant Governor Patrick, so on and so forth. I'm always going to give credit where credit is due, and I'm always going to equally give critique, if you will, when critique is necessary. No matter where that the truth leads, I'm going to pull on that and I'm going to try and expose that and then try to find a solution to it. Right. Um,
yeah.
all of the issues that you just mentioned, we haven't made any progress in, from elections to the schools to what's happening there at the border. I will say this, and using this as a perfect example, I cited on how Governor Abbott signed this proclamation, and then how unfortunately a Texas state agency essentially provides a way to reverse the governor's proclamation.
Yeah.
I think time is going to come very soon where Texans are going to get tired of the doublespeak, where they're going to say, you say that you're doing this, but you're allowing for this to happen. And whether it even be from our state legislators who are on the oversight committees for the Texas HHS, that's allowing this to happen. At what point do we hold our feet to the fire? Do we call them out in a respectful manner, but sit here and go, this is hurting our communities
Yeah.
directly? This needs to stop. And what are
People
you going to do to
people,
reverse
it's seen and I learned this the hard way with, a lot of good people I know. They're friends but, I can get a guy like me gets cross-sided with people because, you see, I can see what's happening in China, Ukraine, and across the globe, and I understand that we have to do business in Austin with Democrats. Folks, I really do. I mean, I get it, but this is existential to America, and I always say to folks, the citizenship that we by birth are here given, uh, because we're Americans, or you became a citizen. to me, that's the most precious gold, anything you can have, because citizenship anywhere else is meaningless. If you can be a citizen of Mexico, you're not going to like it there. That's why they're all coming here. You see, but if we diminish citizenship, American citizenship, we're making the world definitely uh, less safer. And if we don't find a way to do things to control this border, and I go back to the point, I get it. There's administrative. We've got to, we've got to meet in the middle for Texas, for the economics, the fiscal responsibility, taxes. Okay, let's go do that. But on the border, I'll call out anybody. I'm going to tell you right now. Abbott has been just poor, but I see a lot of people sort of surrounding Dan Patrick as, he can't do anything. He's only the most powerful guy in the entire state. He really is, and he can save Texas. And he would be a hero if Abbott's not going to do it. Hell, I'd help him, because really I'm in it just to get the state back to some normal and actually start providing proof that we're Texans, you see. And the fact that you and I are, we're the underlings, I think, out here trying to fight this whole process. And then, of course, you see what happened with Dade Phelan. And I tell you what, Matt Rinaldi really has the challenge on his hands, because I'm hearing a lot of folks just saying we're done with the RNC at the federal level. We're done with the RPT. And I don't know about the RPT, but elected Republicans who refuse to do the will of the people. The word I was going to use earlier, because I've got to let you go here in about 2 minutes, is clinical. They've turned everything very clinical. Everything's pretty clean and cookie cutter. So I'm going to share this. See if you can see this here, folks. This is the article that Sheena wrote. What's your Substack? Well, I've got it up here. Can you say that to people?
Yes, please find me on Substack, the Mid Cities Conservative under Sheena Rodriguez. And you can subscribe there, and so you can keep up to date with it. And then, of course, the website securetheborder.us. You can find information on the action items under the Take Action tab. And subscribe there as well. As securetheborder.us is the website, Mid Cities Conservative. Sign up, because I will be putting out, hopefully on Thursday or Friday, a part 3 going into and diving into some of the specific concerns, that some of these citizens in that many other cities across Texas might be faced in dealing with. But yeah, the Mid Cities Conservative on Substack under Sheena Rodriguez.
Excellent. And look, definitely follow her. Is that a pay Substack or not yet?
So people can subscribe. They can do a free subscription. I've been putting everything up there for free. I want everybody to be able to have access to it. The only thing that's on there right now for paid subscribers, which I have a handful, is just for comments. But it's very important to me that everyone is able to have access to that information and share the information, so you can sign up for free. And for those who are able to help with a paid subscription monthly or yearly, that helps to get me and keep me on the road, because I'm self-funded. Unlike Endeavors, I am not a well-funded
So,
nonprofit. We are a
so where can
C4.
they
So
donate? Tell me where they can donate one more time. Where, if they wanted to donate for your helping you get down the road.
yes, they can. Thank you so much. They can donate any amount there at securetheborder.us under the Take Action tab. That'll go straight to the C4. And then on Substack, if they want, I think I have it set at like $5 or something like that for a monthly paid subscription. That will also help to keep me going to the state capitol and going around Texas to help combat facilities just like this. So either one will work great. So.
Well, look, excellent. As always, thanks for being here. And we'll do another update in about a month or so. God bless you. Stay safe. I'm glad you're not on the road tonight, because it's freezing all over the place. And we will see you next time. Okay, Sheena?
Thank you so much. God bless you. Thank
Hey,
you.
God
Have a
bless you
great
too.
night.
Thank you. All right, folks. That was Sheena Rodriguez. And let me tell you something. This lady is one of the hardest working people. If I had uh, uh, a vision to secure the border, when I ran against Will Hurd back then, and because that was really the piece of it all. Sheena here is just, she does 10 times what I it could even envision, because she's really into the legislative piece of trying to force things, of course, against this whole, Democrats are going to be key chair positions. And folks, I get it. For everybody who's looking, says, that's got to happen for a certain extent. Yeah, but we are now at security levels like I've never seen it before, which is something we're going to have a conversation about here. But before I leave, because we're down to about the last 5 minutes, I want to remind you, I'm going to have this guy right here. Pedro Gonzalez is an amazing writer. He's got a Substack too. He's been on Fox News. He's been on just about everything with Steve Bannon. He's going to be on here Friday at 7 o'clock. We're going to have a conversation, Pedro and I, about a lot of different things. But here lately, he's been talking about how Trump seems to be losing his base. And I'm not going to put too many words into his mouth. But if you're looking at, here's Trump with Lindsey Graham, uh, who, for all practical purposes, is a rhino, but he's supporting Lindsey Graham and all kinds of different things. So there's this little chaotic something happening with what we're seeing, to include his support for Ronna McDaniel. Now, he didn't do it publicly. Trump did not do it publicly, but everybody knew and understood that she wanted Ronna McDaniel, and she wanted Kevin McCarthy. About the only person he hasn't supported and has really thrown under the bus has been Mitch McConnell. So we have some of these folks that lost all the races at the House level. Definitely the RNC is run by Ronna McDaniel. She should have gotten fired, in my opinion, but Trump was helping her. And so Pedro here is going to help us sort of figure out, what's going on in Trump world. You're not going to want to miss that at 7 o'clock. I'll put the advertisements on so you guys can see them. But again, I want to thank Sheena for being on board. And folks, again, I'll tell you straight out, I voted for Abbott and Patrick, and because I want Texas to stay red. But there's going to come a point here, if you don't act like Texans, we're going to lose it. And that's kind of where we're at now. There's just way too many illegal aliens coming in through some policy change the federal government made. It's their fault. They broke it. It's all understood. But now it's time for the governor and the lieutenant governor to take action. People like Sheena, like myself, and a whole other bunch of patriots are out there, just drumming up the pressure and the support to try to get these folks to do anything. They're very powerful. They can do more than what they're doing. And allowing these many people to come in is no bueno for the country, certainly not for Texas. And especially if they do amnesty, if we get amnesty, the middle income, the middle class is going to get severely damaged. It happened back in 1986, 3, the last time we did that. The intent there was Reagan was told, we're going to secure the border. It never happened. And so, again, to do it all over again is not going to be good for this country. While we have all kinds of issues in Ukraine, Taiwan with China, and of course, North Korea acting up as they are, our military going woke, you can see there's a whole lot of stuff going on. But let me say this as I close it up. Don't forget, this country was founded on Judeo Christian principles, and we're going to have to fight for those things here. We have got to profess God is good. He deserves all the glory, and this country was founded on God Almighty. And we have to follow the rule of law. We have to do the right thing. Some of us, even though we're hated, are going to keep standing up until you get it through your head that this is life changing. So, all that said, and it's existential, folks. I've never seen it like this. It's not good. But with all that said, stay positive. God is good. God's in control. But you're going to have to stand up and fight for this country. We're doing it here every Tuesday at 7 o'clock. And when we can, wherever else we can, we will. Friday, don't forget, Pedro is going to be on here. You're not going to want to miss this guy. He's fantastic. God bless you. Everybody have a good night. Stay safe. Stay off the roads. And certainly be on the lookout for each other. Okay. Good night. God bless you. And we'll see you later.